Welcome. Does everyone here know what day today is? It is Darwin Day. I just found that out on Facebook today. And what's interesting about Darwin, it has a lot to do with my topic today, which is adapting to the circumstances around us. Because if we don't adapt, we're going to have a rough time, and the idea is it's the survival of the fittest. Tonight, a couple hashtags for you. Freezing rain. I thank every single person in this audience today for attending, because you are warriors during this kind of snowstorm. You can also have hashtags of agility, think, and career agility. And this is how I feel. I mean, this is what it's like today, right? We were all out today, walking around. A couple times I almost slipped, so I applaud you for being here. So the title, Adapt or Die, how agility will help you future-proof your career. I've been researching agility for about 6 years now. I commissioned original research and I interviewed 120 individuals on this topic on how they adapt to change or don't adapt to change. We all know people like this that have a very difficult time adapting to change. What I found out in some of this research, some of the highlights, were three things. Most people, or everyone really, falls on a spectrum between steadfast and agile. No one is 100% one or the other. And steadfast can be a good thing, but they're a little less receptive to change and feel more comfortable in staying the course. What I also found out, when I take a poll in an audience such as this, and I ask, who here is agile? Do you know that about 60 to 70% of you raise your hands? Because you're feeling it. You're feeling like you need to adapt to what's going on. Yet in reality, it's a little bit less than that. The other thing I found out is 80% of people, and this came out in the interviews, 80% of people got the jobs that they could get out of college, not necessarily the jobs that they were trained for. And what that means is there is some truth that there is a lot of agile thinking going on because you have to figure it out. You may have a job in finance, but it's not in an area that you care about, so you have to move a bit. Today, I am going to give you 4 moves that you can implement right away that will boost your creativity, growth, and happiness in your life's work. And the very first one is adapt. People wonder why I'm so interested in mobility, in movement. And I have a story, and Vanita brought it up today when I met her for the first time, a friend of Pooja's, and she asked me about my story. When I was 12 and a half years old, I was immobilized. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Who in this room recognizes these braces? Just call it out. Call it out.
Polio.
Pardon?
I've seen polio.
Polio. What else?
MS.
Okay. Okay. Forrest Gump. All right. So these are all correct answers, by the way. There's no wrong answers. Forrest Gump wore these braces in his young years. And you know why he wore these braces? He had a crooked spine. his doctor told Mrs. Gump, "Your boy has a spine as crooked as a politician's." So while we may have had a similar experience that I'll show you in a minute, we had a different medical solution. This is the solution that was presented to me at the age of 12 and a half. I wore a full body brace from my hips all the way up to my chin for not just 1 month, for not just 1 year. I wore that brace for 3.5 years, 1,277 days. And I know this because I marked it on a calendar at that time. And if you look at the shape of this spine, when I was 12 and a half, my spine was very close to that shape, within a couple degrees. I was stuck. Initially, my 12-and-a-half-year-old self was just absolutely stuck. Who here in this room has ever been stuck, by a show of hands? It's not pleasant, is it? But what I realized in all of this, and it goes back to the core move that we're talking about, is if you don't adapt, you will get left behind. It can be an awkward experience. You know, some of the girls weren't all that nice in high school. I went to an all-girls high school, and they weren't all that nice. But I found my people, and I realized I wasn't mobile in the way that they were, going to dances and football games and sports and all those things that you do that you look forward to when you're graduating from grade school. You want to be, you know, physically out there. But I thought I had one thing, and I had my mental mobility. And I thought, I am going to do the one thing I can do that I have control over. I had control over my grades. I had control over the kids that I hung out with, even when I couldn't go out and play in the same way as other kids. So it's adapt or die, as Darwin says. The second one, this is our second move, again, that you can implement right away. Create an idea zone. I got this idea of an idea zone from engineers. I worked in technology, as most of you know, for my entire career. And what I discovered when working alongside engineers is they would create these software products and they would have a backlog of ideas. They might have 100 features that people wanted to include in that software release. But guess what? They could only include 10 or 20 or 30 of them. And the more you add, it gets too complicated anyway. So what do you do with those ideas? You don't throw them away. You nurture them, you revisit them, and you come back to them. And maybe in a month or so, some of those ideas are no longer valid, and you do get rid of them. But that's where I got this thinking of, what a great thing to think about life and work if we are accumulating ideas and nurturing them. Ken Blanchard said that an idea vanishes from our brain within 37 seconds of the time that we think about it. How important would that be to write those ideas down? You can write them down in your notes on a device. You can write them down in a program like Evernote, or a journal, or a piece of paper. I'd like to introduce to you someone who did this very well. I call her the adaptable educator, Colleen Cannon-Rufo. And what she did very well was she had lots of ideas. She graduated from college. She was a Spanish teacher. She had so much energy that she came into her district and guess what happened when the people in her department that were a good 10 to 15 years older than her said with all that energy? They said, Colleen, you can do that. That's great, but don't get us involved in all of those ideas. And her ideas had to do with technology. Imagine that, in 1995, there wasn't as much going on in technology, and Colleen had this idea of how she could motivate these young students. Some students didn't naturally adapt to Spanish language. How could she get them engaged? She got them engaged with technology. And she got people excited about learning a language that wouldn't ordinarily be very good students. And she got them engaged by connecting Naperville, Illinois with kids in Spain electronically. She got them involved in these electronic projects. So kids that weren't doing that well were all of a sudden creatively delivering their projects and learning Spanish. This is a direct quote from her. Her story is in the book. I was learning and delivering programs at the same time. So she didn't have the rule book. She had to make it up as she went along. And eventually, in her summertime, a lot of teachers have off in the summertime. Colleen didn't. She started working with different organizations in train-the-trainer programs. Like, how can she get this information out there to other educators and other people out there so that they could learn how to use technology in their jobs? So she worked at Argonne National Laboratory in the summertime, and she was doing these train-the-trainer programs, and so that she could extend this information. She came back to her district, and do you know what job they gave her? Eventually, maybe not at that district, but the next one, they gave her the job of instructional technology. So she went from being a Spanish teacher to be an instructional technologist. She got her master's degree, and she's now working on her PhD in robotics. And she's helping little kids learn how to build robots. So she went from a Spanish teacher, but she took those ideas, and the districts worked with her, and they eventually adapted to the energy that she was putting into the school. The takeaway here: consistently capture ideas. Create an idea zone for yourself and continually nurture it. This is a question for the group, and you can just speak out. Do you have an idea about your role? I know there's people here in organizational behavior, and I know there's people in HR tech. I know there's people in sales. I know there's speakers. I know there's people in IT. Do you have an idea that from your project or your department that you really haven't talked about to your boss? Anybody? Any ideas? Martin.
The idea of content networking. I work in career development and education, and it's something that it hasn't really been talked about very much.
And could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Content networking is basically taking the things that you build and do and create and using social media to leverage it to a wider audience. And I've talked to about 3 people this week that got their current job by writing articles on Medium and LinkedIn and things like that, rather than directly networking at events and things like that.
All right, so kind of creating a brand for themselves so that people will discover them instead of always having to go for it yourself. Yeah, it's a good idea. So, and I think if I recall correctly from seeing some of your work on LinkedIn, you're implementing a bit of that right now. Yeah, Martin's a prolific video person on LinkedIn. And when I first met Martin, he wasn't doing as much video. You were doing lots of other things. But it's getting out of your comfort zone and and delivering all that content. Any other ideas? Great, thanks for sharing that, Martin. The next move is respond to change. We talked about adapting. So now it's time to respond. And you'll notice this shape back here. This shape originally started from the grieving process from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I come to find out that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross also has a change curve. And it has some similar segments, on this curve. But the first one is shock. And then it's denial. And in the grieving process, it's anger. But it depends on what the change is, if anger actually comes into play. And then it's, depression and frustration. And then it's, making some of these changes and adapting them and experimenting and evaluating. And then ultimately integrating all of that into that change. And this curve shows up all the time. It shows up even in adoption curves in technology. People adopt things, and then all of a sudden there's a big slump because people are questioning, they're a little bit disillusioned about the technology, so there's a little bit of a slump because it's so much change. And then the curve goes up again. So I have a story about how the person who wrote a book about change, Activate Your Agile Career, did not respond to change. This is a picture of acquisition day. Anyone who has worked in a growth stage company where your goal is to be acquired, or if you want to have an IPO, gets really excited about these kinds of things. So this was us. We were all having a drink on the river there on acquisition day a few years back. And leading up to that day, change can be good and change can be difficult. In this case, it was great change. Yet, from the time we got acquired to the time all the paperwork happened and it was final, I did nothing. I had worked so hard, as we all do in our jobs. I'd worked so hard getting all the materials together, putting forth our marketing efforts so that we could be acquired. And the day comes when the gentlemen who are doing all the integration, they show up at our headquarters, our small headquarters here in Chicago. And all these guys, they walk into the conference room separately and they're coming out and they're high-fiving each other. They're excited. What happens when you get acquired is you get a new job title and you get a job offer. They knew that. I didn't. And so each one of them coming in and out of that conference room, and then it's my turn. And I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be good. So I get in there, only woman on that management team. I get in there, and the offer is way less than. It was appalling. And the title was 2 layers lower than I thought it should be. Now, it was a Fortune 100 company, I understand that, but it was still 2 layers lower than it should have been. I couldn't do anything on that particular day, but I went back to these guys, each one of them, and asked them their strategy. And they gave me some ideas about how I could rescue this. And I did go back, and I knew we had to close the deal within 10 days. And so I held firm, and I pushed back. And that pushing back netted me $40,000 and the job title that I wanted. But the point of this story is, don't ever do nothing, even if it's good change that is happening. So this is an easy question for all of you. Where do you see change happening in your environment right now? Any kind of change, call it out.
Technology.
Technology change, that's good but difficult, right?
Leadership.
Leadership. And what kind of leadership change are we talking about?
We have a new CHRO, all kinds of new leaders actually.
So a new CHRO, Chief of Human Resources, and it's recent, probably?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're just thinking, what's up,
Yeah.
right? You're probably wondering what to do. Any other kind of change? Right there.
My industry is going more corporate, less private practices are existing.
Okay. More corporate, less private practices. What does that mean?
For me, it would mean how do I position myself in that changing climate?
Mm-hmm. And do you have any ideas about that so far?
Yes, whether I would want to be one of the few surviving private practices or learn a little bit more on the business end of things so I can maybe end up consulting for one of those corporations.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else? Svetlana?
Degree is not enough.
A degree is not enough.
So basically, to elaborate on that, you need to look for opportunities, you need to network, you need to have volunteering work, so you need to get involved so that people recognize that, and that's how you get in roles and leadership positions.
Right.
That's your path.
Right. And if I recall correctly, you either were working on your PhD or you're finished. Mm-hmm. Okay, you're finished. Mm-hmm. Okay, so even with an advanced degree such as this,
Sometimes it's actually even more challenging than, like you said, going back to just no degree out of high school. Sometimes you have more chances to build up your career than staying within like educational environment instead of practicing that in working space.
right.
So you kind of like you have to practice versus like being theoretical.
Right. So yeah, so school is a lot about theory, whether we're doing school on the side. There's a lot of theory in there, but it really is the practicality of all that. So there's lots of change that go on. We heard technology, we heard industry change. So the main thing is, if you leave today and you don't remember anything else, when change happens, don't do nothing. Start thinking about, how does this impact me? How does this impact my industry? How does it impact the people in my company? And what is the position that I want to maintain with this change? The next one, and this is the fourth one. It's parallel pursuits to future-proof your work. We all, I think I heard someone say something as we were greeting each other today about remaining relevant in today's workplace. I think we all want to remain relevant and needed and viable in our workplace. And so the idea of a parallel pursuit came as I was thinking about how does one stay relevant. This happens to be a core principle of the book. You take all your skills and strengths, and so that's what you know about yourself. And then you train and you cultivate. You take on some hobbies, you make connections. And then you start putting them together almost like a set of Lego blocks. And so every one of your jobs isn't going to require all of those skills. They might require 3 of those skills. So you take your Lego block configurations and you put them together in a role. And you excel at this until you want or need to move on to the next role, and then you cultivate more skills and experiences and continue cultivating in this way. So the idea of parallel pursuits is to make these building blocks worthwhile. Parallel project. This was a project that I worked on many years ago. I started something called marketing hackathons at the Illinois Technology Association building. And my idea was, I want to get all these marketers together to figure out what I don't know, because I don't know a lot of things. And we got together and we put our problems out on the table, and then we solved specific marketing problems at those tables. This is one of those tables there. And what I discovered at that marketing hackathon, I did them for about a year. I did them in the evenings as well as weekends. And what I discovered is it's not necessarily the people with the marketing training and the marketing background that come up with the greatest ideas. It's the people that happen to be doing something else, but they happen to have marketing as a component of their job, right? Someone said earlier, I think it was Chloe said, the technology is a big part of change management and culture development. Who knew that, 10 years ago when you were studying this, that technology would play such a big role, or that AI was even on the drawing table, artificial intelligence. So that was something. But the really interesting character I'd like to share with you, and this is somebody that was featured in my book, a guy named Ryan Rasmussen. And what was really fun about his experience for me was he figured out his skill sets along the way, how you think, and how to apply them to your situation. So again, he was like a natural parallel pursuiter. So when he got out of college, he started working in retail management. He was wearing a suit every day with a bow tie. He was working for a company called Levenger. Productivity tools and cool notebooks, and now it's probably a whole lot more electronic and digital. But what he discovered early on, and this was before the dawn of social media, what he discovered was the digital age. This was back in the year 2000. He read this book called The Clue Train Manifesto. Has anybody ever heard of this? It's okay if you've never heard of it, but it was, people in marketing might know of it, but it was a time when 4 gentlemen, I think it was Richard Levine, Christopher Locke, and David Weinberger, and Doc Searles. Those were the 4 guys. They put together this book in the year 2000. It was revolutionary. They put forth that markets were conversations. In the year 2000, nobody knew what that meant. We all know what that means now because we monitor conversations all the time. It isn't necessarily about marketers putting all this information and controlling the message like advertisers used to back in the Mad Men days, but conversation comes full circle. So Ryan got so excited about this, and he created the company's first blog, and then people started coming into the store and they were taking pictures of the bow tie man with his suit. And he realized that he was becoming a brand. And he was doing all of this on the side with the permission of his bosses. He then realized, this retail management isn't what it's all about for him. He has other skills in digital analysis and strategy. He became a VP of analytics ultimately at a very reputable agency here in town. But he realized something. There's no tools. He couldn't get the tools that he wanted, the products that we all know and love right now, to monitor conversations, to do these assessments. So he created 3 of them. And he did that on the side while he was working his job with the permission of his boss, with the owner of the agency. It was those assessment tools became honored by both Harvard and Stanford in that particular year. This was as the dawn of social media was happening. So Ryan is now working, he's VP of listening and analytics at a major bank here in town, not headquartered here. But he's moved, but he's always done these things on the side. And he had an expression once. He said, Marty, I'm more like, I'm a problem solver by day, and I'm Batman at night. And what he meant by that is he became this powerful person. He would go to meetups and he would learn things about topics totally unrelated to his background. And he would spend his time that way. And he would bring that information back to his regular job and solve problems in a unique way. And why is this important? Neuroplasticity and neuroscience. These days it's neuro everything, it's neuromarketing and it's all this brain stuff that's happening that we're really thinking about how our brain works a whole lot more now. And if you consider our brain neurons, and you can look at this from medical things, but let's just look at it from the scope of a hobby. And it's just an illustration I put together. Brain neurons before hobbies. Kind of, you solve problems the same way that you've been solving them. And yet, then you go out and learn something else in the form of a hobby. And it could be learning how to invest. It could be studying the planets. Whatever it is that you do, it informs the way that you think about your core job. And so the neurons of the curious brain end up getting very excited and expressive, and they form more pathways for your brain to come up with more ideas. Parallel pursuits for future-proofing your job. There's an expression, I think it was Lou Holtz, a renowned football coach, said, in this world, you're either growing or you're dying. And we've all heard this expression by several famous people. But he added, so, let's get on with it and grow. There is no choice. It's like you're either growing or you're dying. So, if money and time were not an issue, what have you always wanted to do? Anybody here? Ann.
Learn a different foreign language every year and then go to that country.
Learn a different foreign language every year and go to that country. And this is interesting because Ann knows at least 2 other languages, right?
Yeah.
Russian and French?
German and French.
German and French.
Some Russian, Japanese.
And Russian and Japanese. Little Russian, Japanese. So she learns languages. Yeah, so what's important about learning languages to you beyond that which you already know?
Well, they're interesting, just the structure of the language itself. For example, Russian, I think, has 6 words for friend because they more narrowly define relationships. So you learn a lot about a culture, and then also, it reflects in their art, in their music, in their history. So it's a gateway to a lot of different things. But also just hearing foreign languages and being able to speak them in French is really interesting.
So 6 words for 1 word kind of makes life a little more nuanced, and being able to adopt and adapt to different cultures or understand people.
And it opens up your mind. They perceive things differently when you understand the language. Right? I never really thought about it that way. Or they have words that we don't have. Right. Concepts.
Any other ideas of what you would like to do if money were not an object and if time were not an object? Parisa.
Pastry school.
Pastry school.
And then I would open up the Seeds of Peace Cafe to address specifically Middle Eastern conflict.
Seeds of Peace Cafe. Did everybody hear that? To address Middle East conflict. Pretty powerful. Anybody else? Paula?
Funny you should ask that question. Because the last 2 weeks I've been thinking, you know what, I should just open up a workout studio, because I really believe that there's so many people, and they don't know it yet, even though there's tons of yoga and workout studios, but we need more. And people need to incorporate exercise and good eating into their life regularly. And I walked past a CrossFit gym on the way over here tonight, and I thought, I should find a barren warehouse and just open up another studio and see if I can collect people from the community. That would be fun.
And what I heard from what you were saying, it's not just about working out or being fit. It's about once you are fit, you start thinking about the food that you're putting into your body. You start thinking about the quality of your life. It's about more than working out, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So that's a pretty enriching experience. And these are all examples. I mean, we talked about time and money not being an issue, but there are a lot of things we can do on the side. We could be like Ryan. I mean, Ryan did things on the side, and then that became the next thing. But you don't necessarily have to do the next career. You could take a pastry class. You could start affiliating with other people that do this or like doing this and inviting people over. Okay, great discussion. So before we go on to the close and the wrap up of this presentation, I wanted to invite everybody in this room. There is a sheet on your chair. Some of you may have taken a note or two on it, but half of it is a form that enables you to sign up for subscribing to 52 ideas, one new idea every week. There's also an agility guide, and if anyone's interested in discussions like this in their organization. So those things. So before you leave today, it would be great to have that. And just to let people know, I have a little picture of myself in the corner with my book, that there are books here for sale as well, if anybody wants to grab one on the way out. And as we complete the road today, are there any questions, burning questions that you have before I wrap up? Anybody?
I have a question.
Parisa.
This was phenomenal, so thank you so much. I really appreciate it. In the work that I do with my clients, a lot of conversations are, I need to do this versus I want to do this. And so in these conversations you're having with people about adapting so that they stay relevant in their work, or adapt or die, which I know is a core belief of yours. Some people feel like they have to do things that don't feel authentic to them to stay relevant in the work that they're doing. So have you talked to people about that, or what has your research shown in those cases where there's this need versus want happening?
Well, I would like to reference another woman, and her name is escaping me right now. I think it's one of the, it's a top TED Talk. It's at the crossroads of should and must. And that when people start saying, I need to do this, or I should do this, it's a matter of really asking yourself, what is it that I really want to do? And I think what Parisa's bringing up is really important. It is self-awareness. If you don't know who you are and how you're wired and how you can better show up and contribute in this world, it's really difficult to make a decision. So it's our responsibility. We can't get that all from corporations. Corporations can give us some tools. They can enable all kinds of training, but if we don't contribute feedback to our managers or our friends, we're not going to be able to be doing something that's authentic to us. And this brings also the topic of branding. You can tell when someone really, really cares about what they are doing. And I'll point out Michelle, who is a practicing attorney that has made a switch to.
I am now working with other attorneys and financial services professionals who have reached a degree of success but ultimately feel like they're burned out, they're not happy, they're underappreciated, and it's really looking at, do they need to make a career change or do they need to make some shifts elsewhere in their life?
So she's helping them, and I've seen this transition. Actually, I've seen a lot of it over social media, really, because she's become very authentic in her desire to make this move over the past year. And it often, when we make a move, it's not just, oh, I want to change a job. It's usually like, oh, my health isn't doing so well, or there's things like that. We've all gone through, or we're taking care of aging parents. We have to make decisions that are different than we would make otherwise. But that's what being authentic is. So that's a really great question. Any other questions? Martin?
I just want to shout if anyone's looking for that book. It's El Luna.
Oh, it's El Luna. Yeah, El Luna actually went to the School of the Art Institute, Chicago. I knew one of her professors. And she wrote this article, and I believe as the story goes, she wrote this article at the crossroads of should and must as a, I don't know if she originally wrote it on LinkedIn, but that's where I discovered it. But it went viral, just hundreds of thousands of views. And of course she's an artist, so she drew these beautiful, these fanciful illustrations to really ask yourself. And she was a student. She was a very enlightened student to have that kind of discussion. Any other questions before I move on? Brian?
I'm curious if you were able to implant one idea into the brain of every executive that you met, of all the ideas that you've kind of pulled together around this concept, what would be the first one that you would decide to kind of infuse into their thinking?
This is an interesting point because I interviewed lots of individuals for this book. And I have now been working to support the needs of organizations, the places where they work. And what I recognized in talking to people on both sides of the equation, people need to find some level of creativity, growth, and happiness in their life's work. And so the idea is creating happy, profitable employees is a great idea. And it's a great idea for two reasons. Every organization needs the right margins. People are being measured now differently. It's going to be how the money that comes as a part of the organization with the output that's being put there, that's profits. Companies have to be profit. They're not bad because they need to be profitable. But the people who work there also need to be profitable. So that's my stab.
Thank you.
Okay. Paula?
Any thoughts, suggestions on how you bust through fear of just transforming your life and the practical money survival issues in this whole idea of being agile and changing or pursuing your dreams or changing a career?
That's a really good question, and I get approached by mothers who have a couple kids, don't have a lot of time. They may or may not be married, and so time is tough. And they'll say, well, how can I do this? And the great thing about agility is it's done in increments. It's fine-tune adjustments every step of the way. So an agile project would start with one small step. Getting the man on the moon was a lot of steps. Kennedy said, we're going to have a man on the moon in 10 years. People freaked out. They didn't know how it was going to happen. And yet, they came together and broke everything down into very small slices, banded together in agile teams, by the way, to accomplish this. And they did get a man on the moon within 10 years. So that's how I would answer that question. So it's a good question. Nolene.
I was just going to add that for me, whenever there's been parallel pursuits, it's been, can I find 1 or 2 hours a day? Does that mean I get up an hour earlier? Does that mean, because I have 2 kids, as you know, does that mean after they go to bed, I don't watch TV, but I'm doing some other work? And it can be a parallel pursuit. It can also be just my own work, but it's, if there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah, and I think that's a real important thing. Noah Lane's story is in the book too. She was made for a very interesting interview. She's kind of a positive person when it comes to problem solving, right? So she's got two little boys, right? And you don't have much time. And the mothers that I interview are actually the most productive people I know because they take those hours and they make them count. And if they are working at a corporation, they might make their lunches count more, right? Or they might decide, I'm going to take a lunch. You know, we work at our desks a lot. Take the lunch, create.
I think forgiving yourself and being, it's not going to happen every day. You know what I mean? It just isn't. And you find the time when you can, and when you can't, you get over it and say, tomorrow's another day.
Right. And she brings up a real important point because I myself discovered anxiety for the first time in my life. I thought that I had skipped through my entire life without an ounce of anxiety. And we all think if we accomplish a lot, of course, I can handle all that. And you have to be good to yourself and kind to yourself. And at the end of the day, I used to be a person that I would get everything done before I left. Bosses love me, but there's a price to pay for that. So tomorrow is another day, and if the projects are managed properly, you could probably be more productive if you're getting a little bit more sleep. Or not. So these were great questions, guys. Thanks so much for that.
I spent time in Mexico and I saw a great sign this trip. It said, Carpe Mañana.
Connie, I love that. I love that. So carpe mañana. So seize tomorrow. Seize tomorrow. So this happens to be the model that's in the book. I won't spend time going through that, but it's a little bit like the grieving process. You don't have to do it all at once. It's just taking these steps and figuring it out. So the 4 moves that are actionable today: adapt or die. Don't stay stuck. You can be stuck for a while, but don't stay stuck. Consistently capture ideas. Create that idea zone for yourself. The idea zone is so cool because when you're having your worst day, you can go to that zone for 5 minutes, just like a form of meditation. And you can come out of that 5 minutes feeling remarkably different. Number 3, don't do nothing. When there is change afoot, good or bad, don't do nothing. And then use parallel pursuits to your advantage. It can be education, it can be hobbies, it can be a side gig, it can be a freelance project. But this will future-proof your career and you will remain relevant your entire career. So you'll remember, I talked about Forrest Gump. And do you remember what he did when those nasty boys were cycling towards him? He ran. Connie says he ran. And he ran as fast as he could, right? He used movement to get to the next stage of his life. And you'll recall, as I started out the story early on, as a 12-and-a-half-year-old girl, that I didn't have movement. And when that brace came off, and you can look at all those pieces of Forrest Gump's braces going to the side of the road, when I saw that scene, I imagined the day that I got that brace off. I believed, truly believed, that I could do anything because no one was restraining me any longer. And all of us can do that. Paula talked about fear. Fear does that. It doesn't have to be a brace. And I think about this brace sometimes when things are holding me back. And the brace is actually the physical remembrance of what that's like. But, you know, it's like you can get beyond that. And look at I know it was a movie, but Forrest Gump never stopped moving. He ran from one end of the country to the other, and he accomplished a lot. Yes, it's a story, but we can all do that with movement and move beyond.